Mysteries await just a page away. Ready to dive in? Welcome to The Book Reader, where stories unfold one enchanting page at a time. Subscribe now and unlock the magic.
The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest, Stieg Larsson.
Part 3. Disk Crash. May 27th to June 6th. The historian Diodorus from Sicily, 2nd century BC, who is regarded as an unreliable source by other historians, describes the Amazons of Libya, which at that time was a name used for all of North Africa west of Egypt. This Amazon reign was a gynecocracy. That is, only women were allowed to hold high office, including in the military. According to legend, the realm was ruled by a queen Marina, who with 30,000 female soldiers and 3,000 female cavalry swept through Egypt and Syria and all the way to the Aegean, defeating a number of male armies along the way. After Queen Marina finally fell in battle, her army scattered. But the army did leave its imprint on the region. The women of Anatolia took to the sword to crush an invasion from the Caucasus, after the male soldiers were all slaughtered in a far-reaching genocide. These women trained in the use of all types of weapons, including bow and arrow, spear, battle axe, and lance. They copied their bronze breastplates and armor from the Greeks. They rejected marriage as subjugation. So that they might have children, they were granted a leave of absence, during which they copulated with randomly selected males from nearby towns. Only a woman who had killed a man in battle was allowed to give up her virginity. Chapter 16. Friday, May 27th to Tuesday, May 31st. Blomkvist left the Millennium offices at 10:30 on Friday night. He took the stairs down to the ground floor, but instead of going out onto the street he turned left and went through the basement, across the inner courtyard, and through the building behind theirs onto Håkans Gata. He ran into a group of youths on their way from Mosebach, but no one seemed to be paying him any attention. Anyone watching the building would think that he was spending the night at Millennium, as he often did. He had established that pattern as early as April. Actually, it was Mom who had the night shift. He spent 15 minutes walking down the alleys and boulevards around Mosebach before he headed for Fiskergatan 9. He opened the door using the code and took the stairs to the top floor apartment, where he used Salander's keys to get in. He turned off the alarm. He always felt a bit bemused when he went into the apartment. 21 rooms, of which only 3 were furnished. He made coffee and sandwiches before he went into Salander's office and booted up her PowerBook. From the moment in mid-April when Bjork's report was stolen and Blomkvist realized he was under surveillance, he had established his own headquarters at Salander's apartment. He had transferred the most crucial documentation to her desk. He spent several nights a week at the apartment, slept in her bed, and worked on her computer. She had wiped her hard drive clean before she left for Gosseberga and the confrontation with Zalachenko. Blomkvist supposed that she had not planned to come back. He had used her system disks to restore her computer to a functioning state. Since April, he had not even plugged in the broadband cable to his own machine. He logged on to her broadband connection, started up the ICQ chat program, and pinged up the address she had created for him through the Yahoo group, idiotic_table. Less than hi, Sally. Greater than. Less than talk to me. Greater than. Less than I've been working on the 2 chapters we discussed earlier this week. New version is on Yahoo. How's it going with you? Less than finished with 17 pages. Uploading now. Greater than. Ping. Less than okay. Got him. Let me read, then we'll talk later. Greater than. Less than I've got more. Greater than. Less than more what? Less than I created another Yahoo group called the _Knights. Greater than. Blomkvist smiled. Less than the Knights of the idiotic table. Greater than. Less than password Yakaraka 12. Greater than. Less than 4 members. You, me, Plague, and Trinity. Greater than. Less than your mysterious nighttime buddies. Greater than. Less than protection. Greater than. Less than okay. Greater than. Less than Plague has copied info from Prosecutor Ekstrom's computer. We hacked it in April. If I lose the palm, he'll keep you informed. Greater than. Less than good. Thanks. Greater than. Blomkvist logged in to ICQ and went into the newly created Yahoo group, the _Knights. All he found was a link from Plague to an anonymous URL which consisted solely of numbers. He copied the address into Explorer, hit the return key, and came to a website somewhere on the internet that contained the 16 gigabytes of Ekstrom's hard drive. Plague had obviously made it simple for himself by copying over Ekstrom's entire hard drive, and Blomkvist spent more than an hour sorting through its contents. He ignored the system files, software, and endless files containing preliminary investigations that seemed to stretch back several years. He downloaded 4 folders. 3 of them were called Prelim INV, Salander, Slush, Salander, and Prelim INV, Niederman. The 4th was a copy of Ekstrom's email folder made at 2:00 p.m. the previous day. Thanks, Plague, Blomkvist said to himself. He spent 3 hours reading through Ekstrom's preliminary investigation and strategy for the trial. Not surprisingly, much of it dealt with Salander's mental state. Ekstrom wanted an extensive psychiatric examination and had sent a lot of messages with the object of getting her transferred to Kronoberg prison as a matter of urgency. Blomkvist could tell that Ekstrom was making no headway in his search for Niederman. Bublansky was the leader of that investigation. He had succeeded in gathering some forensic evidence linking Niederman to the murders of Svensson and Johansson, as well as to the murder of Bjurman. Blomkvist's own 3 long interviews in April had set them on the trail of this evidence. If Niederman were ever apprehended, Blomkvist would have to be a witness for the prosecution. At long last, DNA from sweat droplets and 2 hairs from Bjurman's apartment were matched to items from Niederman's room in Gosseberga. The same DNA was found in abundant quantities on the remains of Swawelsio MC's Goransson. On the other hand, Ekstrom had remarkably little on the record about Zalachenko. Blomkvist lit a cigarette and stood by the window looking out towards Djurgården. Ekstrom was leading 2 separate preliminary investigations. Criminal Inspector Fast was the investigative leader in all matters dealing with Salander. Bublansky was working only on Niederman. When the name Zalachenko turned up in the preliminary investigation, the logical thing for Ekstrom to do would have been to contact the general director of the security police to determine who Zalachenko actually was. Blomkvist could find no such enquiry in Ekstrom's email, journal, or notes. But among the notes Blomkvist found several cryptic sentences. The Salander investigation is fake. Bjork's original doesn't match Blomkvist's version. Classified top secret. Then a series of notes claiming that Salander was paranoid and a schizophrenic. Correct to lock up Salander 1991. He found what linked the investigations in the Salander slush, that is, the supplementary information that the prosecutor considered irrelevant to the preliminary investigation, and which would therefore not be presented at the trial or make up part of the chain of evidence against her. This included almost everything that had to do with Zalachenko's background. The investigation was totally inadequate. Blomkvist wondered to what extent this was a coincidence and to what extent it was contrived. Where was the boundary? And was Ekstrom aware that there was a boundary? Could it be that someone was deliberately supplying Ekstrom with believable but misleading information? Finally, Blomkvist logged into Hotmail and spent 10 minutes checking the half-dozen anonymous email accounts he had created. Each day he had checked the address he had given to Criminal Inspector Modig. He had no great hope that she would contact him, so he was mildly surprised when he opened the inbox and found an email from Resulskap9April@hotmail.com. The message consisted of a single line. Café Madeline, upper level, 11:00 a.m. Saturday. Plague pinged Salander at midnight and interrupted her in the middle of a sentence she was writing about her time with Holger Palmgren as her guardian. She cast an irritated glance at the display. Less than what do you want? Less than hi, wasp. Nice to hear from you too, greater than. Less than yeah. What is it? Less than Teleborian, greater than. She sat up in bed and looked eagerly at the screen of her palm. Less than tell me, greater than. Less than Trinity fixed it in record time, greater than. Less than how? Less than the crazy doctor won't stay in one place. He travels between Uppsala and Stockholm all the time and we can't do a hostile takeover, greater than. Less than I know. How? Less than he plays tennis twice a week. About 2 hours. Left his computer in the car in a garage, greater than. Less than aha, greater than. Less than Trinity easily disabled the car alarm to get the computer. Took him 30 minutes to copy everything via FireWire and install Asphyxia, greater than. Less than where? Plague gave her the URL of the server where he kept Teleborian's hard drive. Less than to quote Trinity, this is one nasty shit, greater than. Less than check his hard drive, greater than. Salander disconnected from Plague and accessed the server he had directed her to. She spent nearly 3 hours scrutinizing folder after folder on Teleborian's computer. She found correspondence between Teleborian and a person with a Hotmail address who sent encrypted email. Since she had access to Teleborian's PGP key, she easily decoded the correspondence. His name was Jonas, no last name. Jonas and Teleborian had an unhealthy interest in seeing that Salander did not thrive. Yes, we can prove that there is a conspiracy. But what really interested Salander were the 47 folders containing close to 9,000 photographs of explicit child pornography. She clicked on image after image of children aged about 15 or younger. A number of pictures were of infants. The majority were of girls. Many of them were sadistic. She found links to at least a dozen people abroad who traded child porn with one another. Salander bit her lip, but her face was otherwise expressionless. She remembered the nights when, as a 12-year-old, she had been strapped down in a stimulus-free room at St. Stefan's. Teleborian had come into the room again and again to look at her in the glow of the night light. She knew. He had never touched her, but she had always known. She should have dealt with Teleborian years ago. But she had repressed the memory of him. She had chosen to ignore his existence. After a while she pinged Blomkvist on ICQ. Blomkvist spent the night at Salander's apartment on Fiskergatan. He did not shut down the computer until 6:30 a.m. and fell asleep with photographs of gross child pornography whirling through his mind. He woke at 10:15 and rolled out of Salander's bed, showered, and called a taxi to pick him up outside Sodra Theatre. He got out at Burger Jarlsgaten at 10:55 and walked to Café Madeline. Modig was waiting for him with a cup of black coffee in front of her. "Hi," Blomkvist said. "I'm taking a big risk here," she said without greeting. "Nobody will hear of our meeting from me." She seemed stressed. "One of my colleagues recently went to see former Prime Minister Falden. He went there on his own initiative, and his job is on the line now too." "I understand. I need a guarantee of anonymity for both of us. I don't even know which colleague you're talking about. I'll tell you later. I want you to promise to give him protection as a source." "You have my word." She looked at her watch. "Are you in a hurry?" "Yes. I have to meet my husband and kids at the Storigalarian in 10 minutes. He thinks I'm still at work." "And Bublansky knows nothing about this?" "No." "Right. You and your colleague are sources and you have complete source protection. Both of you. As long as you live. My colleague is Jerker Holmberg. You met him down in Gobog. His father is a Center Party member, and Jerker has known Prime Minister Falden since he was a child. He seems to be pleasant enough. So Jerker went to see him and asked about Zalachenko." Blomkvist's heart began to pound. Jerker asked Falden what he knew about the defection, but Falden didn't reply. When Holmberg told him that we suspect Salander was locked up by the people who were protecting Zalachenko, well, that really upset him. Did he say how much he knew? Falden told him that the chief of Sapo at the time and a colleague came to visit him very soon after he became prime minister. They told a fantastic story about a Russian defector who had come to Sweden, told him that it was the most sensitive military secret Sweden possessed, that there was nothing in Swedish military intelligence that was anywhere near as important. Falden said he didn't know how to handle it, that there was no one with much experience in government, the Social Democrats having been in power for more than 40 years. He was advised that he alone had to make the decisions, and that if he discussed it with his government colleagues then Sapo would wash their hands of it. He remembered the whole thing as being very unpleasant. What did he do? He realized he had no choice but to do what the gentleman from Sapo proposed. He issued a directive putting Sapo in sole charge of the defector. He pledged never to discuss the matter with anyone. Falden was never ever told Zalachenko's name. Extraordinary. After that he heard almost nothing more during his 2 terms in office. But he did do something extremely shrewd. He insisted that an Undersecretary of State be let in on the secret, in case there was a need for a go-between for the government secretariat and those who were protecting Zalachenko. Did he remember who it was? It was Bertil K. Genered, now Swedish ambassador in The Hague. When it was explained to Falden how serious this preliminary investigation was, he sat down and wrote to Genered. Modig pushed an envelope across the table. Dear Bertil, the secret we both protected during my administration is now the subject of some very serious questions. The person referred to in the matter is now deceased and can no longer come to harm. But other people can. It is of the utmost importance that we obtain answers to the necessary questions. The person who bears this letter is working unofficially and has my trust. I urge you to listen to his story and answer his questions. Use your famous good judgment. T.F. This letter is referring to Homburg? No. Jerker asked Falden not to put in a name. He said that he couldn't know who would be going to The Hague. You mean? ? Jerker and I have discussed it. We're already out on ice so thin that we'll need paddles rather than ice picks. We have no authority to travel to Holland to interview the ambassador. But you could do it. Blomqvist folded the letter and was putting it into his jacket pocket when Modig grabbed his hand. Her grip was hard. Information for information, she said. We want to hear everything Genered tells you. Blomqvist nodded. Modig stood up. Hang on. You said that Falden was visited by 2 people from Sapo. One was the chief of Sapo. Who was the other? Falden met him only on that one occasion and couldn't remember his name. No notes were taken at the meeting. He remembered him as thin with a narrow mustache. But he did recall that the man was introduced as the boss of the section for special analysis, or something like that. Falden later looked at an organizational chart of Sapo and couldn't find that department. The Zalachenko Club, Blomqvist thought. Modig seemed to be weighing her words. At the risk of ending up dead, she said at last, there is one record that neither Falden nor his visitors thought of. What was that? Falden's visitors' logbook at Rosenbad. Jerker requisitioned it. It's a public document. And? Modig hesitated once again. The book states only that the Prime Minister met with the chief of Sapo along with a colleague to discuss general questions. Was there a name? Yes. E. Gullberg. Blomqvist could feel the blood rush to his head. Evert Gullberg, he said. Blomqvist called from Café Madeleine on his anonymous mobile to book a flight to Amsterdam. The plane would take off from Arlanda at 2:50. He walked to Dressman on Kingsgaten and bought a shirt and a change of underwear, and then he went to a pharmacy to buy a toothbrush and other toiletries. He checked carefully to see that he was not being followed and hurried to catch the Arlanda Express. The plane landed at Schiphol Airport at 4:50, and by 6:30 he was checking into a small hotel about 15 minutes walk from the Hague Central station. He spent 2 hours trying to locate the Swedish ambassador and made contact by telephone at around 9 o'clock. He used all his powers of persuasion and explained that he was there on a matter of great urgency. The ambassador finally relented and agreed to meet him at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning. Then Blomkvist went out and had a light dinner at a restaurant near his hotel. He was asleep by 11 o'clock. Ambassador Generid was in no mood for small talk when he offered Blomkvist coffee at his residence on Langvorhout. "Well, what is it that's so urgent?" Alexander Zalachenko, the Russian defector who came to Sweden in 1976, Blomkvist said, handing him the letter from Falden. Generid looked surprised. He read the letter and laid it on the table beside him. Blomkvist explained the background and why Falden had written to him. I can't discuss this matter," Generid said at last. "I think you can." "No. I can only speak of it with the Constitutional Committee. There's a great probability that you will have to do just that. But this letter tells you to use your own good judgment. Falden is an honest man. I don't doubt that. And I'm not looking to damage either you or Falden. Nor do I ask you to tell me a single military secret that Zalachenko may have revealed. I don't know any secrets. I didn't even know that his name was Zalachenko. I only knew him by his cover name, Ruben. But it's absurd that you should think I would discuss it with a journalist. Let me give you one very good reason why you should," Blomkvist said and sat up straight in his chair. "This whole story is going to be published very soon. And when that happens, the media will either tear you to pieces or describe you as an honest civil servant who made the best of an impossible situation. You were the one Falden assigned to be the go-between with those who were protecting Zalachenko. I already know that." Generid was silent for almost a minute. "Listen, I never had any information, not the remotest idea of the background you've described. I was young. I didn't know how I should deal with these people. I met them about twice a year during the time I worked for the government. I was told that Ruben, your Zalachenko, was alive and healthy, that he was cooperating, and that the information he provided was invaluable. I was never privy to the details. I had no need to know." Quote. Blomkvist waited. The defector had operated in other countries and knew nothing about Sweden, so he was never a major factor for security policy. "I informed the Prime Minister on a couple of occasions, but there was never very much to report." "I see. They always said that he was being handled in the customary way and that the information he provided was being processed through the appropriate channels. What could I say? If I asked for clarification, they smiled and said that it was outside my security clearance level. I felt like an idiot. You never considered the fact that there might be something wrong with the arrangement?" "No. There was nothing wrong with the arrangement. I took it for granted that Sapo knew what they were doing and had the appropriate routines and experience. But I can't talk about this." Generid had by this time been talking about it for several minutes. "Okay. But all this is beside the point. Only one thing is important right now." "What?" "The names of the individuals you had your meetings with." Generid gave Blomkvist a puzzled look. The people who were looking after Zalachenko went far beyond their jurisdiction. They've committed serious criminal acts, and they'll be the subject of a preliminary investigation. That's why Falden sent me to see you. He doesn't know who they are. You were the one who met them." Generid blinked and pressed his lips together. "One was Evert Gullberg. He was the top man." Generid nodded. "How many times did you meet him?" "He was at every meeting except one. There were about 10 meetings during the time Falden was Prime Minister." "Where did you meet?" "In the lobby of some hotel. Usually the Sheraton. Once at the Amaranth on Kingsholmen and sometimes at the Continental pub. And who else was at the meetings? It was a long time ago. I don't remember. Try. There was a Clinton, like the American president. First name? Frederick. I saw him 4 or 5 times. Others? Hans von Rottinger. I knew him through my mother. Your mother? Yes, my mother knew the von Rottinger family. Hans von Rottinger was always a pleasant guy. Before he turned up out of the blue at a meeting with Gullberg, I had no idea that he worked for Sapo. He didn't, Blomkvist said. Generid turned pale. He worked for something called the Section for Special Analysis, Blomkvist said. What were you told about that group? Nothing. I mean, just that they were the ones who took care of the defector. Right. But isn't it strange that they don't appear anywhere in Sapo's organizational chart? That's ridiculous. It is, isn't it? So how did they set up the meetings? Did they call you, or did you call them? Neither. The time and place for each meeting was set at the preceding one. What happened if you needed to get in contact with them? For instance, to change the time of a meeting or something like that. I had a number to call. What was the number? I couldn't possibly remember. Who answered if you called the number? I don't know. I never used it. Next question. Who did you hand everything over to? How do you mean? When Falden's term came to an end, who took your place? I don't know. Did you write a report? No. Everything was classified. I couldn't even take notes. And you never briefed your successor? No. So what happened? Well, Falden left office, and Ola Ulston came in. I was told that we would have to wait until after the next election. Then Falden was re-elected and our meetings were resumed. Then came the election in 1985. The Social Democrats won, and I assumed that Palm appointed somebody to take over from me. I transferred to the Foreign Ministry and became a diplomat. I was posted to Egypt and then to India. Blomkvist went on asking questions for another few minutes, but he was sure that he already had everything Generid could tell him. 3 names. Frederick Clinton, Hans von Rottinger, and Evert Gullberg, the man who had shot Zalachenko. The Zalachenko Club. He thanked Generid for the meeting and walked the short distance along Lang Voorhout to Hotel des Indies, from which he took a taxi to Central. It was not until he was in the taxi that he reached into his jacket pocket and stopped the tape recorder. Berger looked up and scanned the half-empty newsroom beyond the glass cage. Home was off that day. She saw no one who showed any interest in her, either openly or covertly. Nor did she have reason to think that anyone on the editorial staff wished her ill. The email had arrived a minute before. The sender was editorial@aftonbladet.com. Why Aftonbladet? The address was another fake. Today's message contained a JPEG, which she opened in Photoshop. The image was pornographic. A naked woman with exceptionally large breasts, a dog collar around her neck. She was on all fours and being mounted from the rear. The woman's face had been replaced with Berger's. It was not a skilled collage, but probably that was not the point. The picture was from her old byline at Millennium and could be downloaded off the net. At the bottom of the picture was one word, written with the spray function in Photoshop. Whore. This was the 9th anonymous message she had received containing the word whore, sent apparently by someone at a well-known media outlet in Sweden. She had a cyber stalker on her hands. The telephone tapping was a more difficult task than the computer monitoring. Trinity had no trouble locating the cable to Prosecutor Ekstrom's home phone. The problem was that Ekstrom seldom or never used it for work-related calls. Trinity did not even consider trying to bug Ekstrom's work phone at Police HQ on Kingsholmen. That would have required extensive access to the Swedish cable network, which he did not have. But Trinity and Bob the dog devoted the best part of a week to identifying and separating out Ekstrom's mobile from the background noise of about 200,000 other mobiles within half a mile of police headquarters. They used a technique called random frequency tracking system. The technique was not uncommon. It had been developed by the U.S. National Security Agency and was built into an unknown number of satellites that performed pinpoint monitoring of capitals around the world, as well as flashpoints of special interest. The NSA had enormous resources and used a vast network in order to capture a large number of mobile conversations in a certain region simultaneously. Each individual call was separated and processed digitally by computers programmed to react to certain words, such as terrorist or Kalashnikov. If such a word occurred, the computer automatically sent an alarm, which meant that some operator would go in manually and listen to the conversation to decide whether it was of interest or not. It was a more complex problem to identify a specific mobile. Each mobile has its own unique signature, a fingerprint, in the form of the phone number. With exceptionally sensitive equipment, the NSA could focus on a specific area to separate out and monitor mobile calls. The technique was simple but not 100% effective. Outgoing calls were particularly hard to identify. Incoming calls were simpler because they were preceded by the fingerprint that would enable the phone in question to receive the signal. The difference between Trinity's and the NSA's attempting to eavesdrop could be measured in economic terms. The NSA had an annual budget of several billion US dollars, close to 12,000 full-time agents, and access to cutting-edge technology in IT and telecommunications. Trinity had a van with 60 pounds of electronic equipment, much of which was homemade stuff that Bob the dog had set up. Through its global satellite monitoring, the NSA could train highly sensitive antennae on a specific building anywhere in the world. Trinity had an antenna constructed by Bob the dog which had an effective range of about 500 yards. The relatively limited technology to which Trinity had access meant that he had to park his van on Bergsgaten or one of the nearby streets and laboriously calibrate the equipment until he had identified the fingerprint that represented Ekstrom's mobile number. Since he did not know Swedish, he had to relay the conversations via another mobile to Plague, who did the actual eavesdropping. For 5 days, Plague, who was looking more and more hollow-eyed, listened in vain to a vast number of calls to and from police headquarters and the surrounding buildings. He heard fragments of ongoing investigations, uncovered planned lovers' trysts, and taped hours and hours of conversations of no interest whatsoever. Late on the evening of the 5th day, Trinity sent a signal which a digital display instantly identified as Ekstrom's mobile number. Plague locked the parabolic antenna onto the exact frequency. The technology of RFTS worked primarily on incoming calls to Ekstrom. Trinity's parabolic antenna captured the search for Ekstrom's mobile number as it was sent through the ether. Because Trinity could record the calls from Ekstrom, he also got voice prints that Plague could process. Plague ran Ekstrom's digitized voice through a program called VPRS, Voice Print Recognition System. He specified a dozen commonly occurring words, such as OK or salander. When he had 5 separate examples of a word, he charted it with respect to the time it took to speak the word, what tone of voice and frequency range it had, whether the end of the word went up or down, and a dozen other markers. The result was a graph. In this way, Plague could also monitor outgoing calls from Ekstrom. His parabolic antenna would be permanently listening out for a call containing Ekstrom's characteristic graph curve for one of a dozen commonly occurring words. The technology was not perfect, but roughly half of all the calls that Ekstrom made on his mobile from anywhere near police headquarters were monitored and recorded. The system had an obvious weakness. As soon as Ekstrom left police headquarters, it was no longer possible to monitor his mobile, unless Trinity knew where he was and could park his van in the immediate vicinity. With the authorization from the highest level, Edclinth had been able to set up a legitimate operations department. He picked 4 colleagues, purposely selecting younger talent who had experience on the regular police force and had been only recently recruited to SIS. 2 had a background in the fraud division, 1 had been with the financial police, and 1 was from the violent crimes division. They were summoned to Edclinth's office and told of their assignment as well as the need for absolute secrecy. He made plain that the investigation was being carried out at the express order of the Prime Minister. Inspector Figueroa was named as their chief, and she directed the investigation with a force that matched her physical appearance. But the investigation proceeded slowly. This was largely due to the fact that no one was quite sure who or what should be investigated. On more than one occasion Edclinth and Figueroa considered bringing Martinson in for questioning. But they decided to wait. Arresting him would reveal the existence of the investigation. Finally, on Tuesday, 11 days after the meeting with the Prime Minister, Figueroa came to Edclinth's office. "I think we've got something. Sit down." Evert Gullberg, one of our investigators, had a talk with Marcus Erlander, who's leading the investigation into Zalachenko's murder. According to Erlander, SIS contacted the Gobog police just 2 hours after the murder and gave them information about Gullberg's threatening letters. That was fast. A little too fast. SIS faxed 9 letters that Gullberg had supposedly written. There's just one problem. What's that? 2 of the letters were sent to the Justice Department, to the Minister of Justice and to the Deputy Minister. I know that. Yes, but the letter to the Deputy Minister wasn't logged in at the department until the following day. It arrived with a later delivery. Edclinth stared at Figueroa. He felt very afraid that his suspicions were going to turn out to be justified. Figueroa went implacably on. So we have SIS sending a fax of a threatening letter that hadn't yet reached its addressee. Good Lord, Edclinth said. It was someone in personal protection who faxed them through. Who? I don't think he's involved in the case. The letters landed on his desk in the morning, and shortly after the murder he was told to get in touch with the Gobog police. Who gave him the instruction? The Chief of Secretariat's assistant. Good God, Monica. Do you know what this means? It means that SIS was involved in Zalachenko's murder. Not necessarily. But it definitely does mean that some individuals within SIS had knowledge of the murder before it was committed. The only question is, who? The Chief of Secretariat? Yes. But I'm beginning to suspect that this Zalachenko club is out of house. How do you mean? Martinson. He was moved from personal protection and is working on his own. We've had him under surveillance around the clock for the past week. He hasn't had contact with anyone within SIS as far as we can tell. He gets calls on a mobile that we cannot monitor. We don't know what number it is, but it's not his normal number. He did meet with the fair-haired man, but we haven't been able to identify him. Edclinth frowned. At the same instant Anders Berglund knocked on the door. He was one of the new team, the officer who had worked with the financial police. I think I've found Evert Gullberg, Berglund said. Come in, Edclinth said. Berglund put a dog-eared black and white photograph on the desk. Edclinth and Figueroa looked at the picture, which showed a man that both of them immediately recognized. He was being led through a doorway by 2 broad-shouldered plainclothes police officers. The legendary double agent Colonel Stig Wennerström. This print comes from Allian and Ackerland Publishers and was used in Say magazine in the spring of 1964. The photograph was taken in the course of the trial. Behind Wennerström you can see 3 people. On the right, Detective Superintendent Otto Daniel's son, the policeman who arrested him. Yes? Look at the man on the left behind Daniel's son. They saw a tall man with a narrow mustache who was wearing a hat. He reminded Edclinth vaguely of the writer Dashiell Hammett. Compare his face with this passport photograph of Gullberg, taken when he was 66. Edclinth frowned. I wouldn't be able to swear it's the same person. But it is, Berglund said. Turn the print over. On the reverse was a stamp saying that the picture belonged to Allian and Ackerland Publishers and that the photographer's name was Julius Estholm. The text was written in pencil. Stig Wennerström flanked by 2 police officers on his way into Stockholm District Court. In the background Daniel's son, E. Goldberg and H. W. Frank. Evert Goldberg, Figueroa said. He was cis. No, Berglund said. Technically speaking, he wasn't. At least not when this picture was taken. Oh? Cis wasn't established until 4 months later. In this photograph he was still with the security police. Who's H. W. Frank? Figueroa said. Hans Wilhelm Frank, Edklanth said. Died in the early 90s, but was assistant chief of the security police in the late 50s and early 60s. He was a bit of a legend, just like Otto Daniels' son. I actually met him a couple of times. Is that so? Figueroa said. He left CIS in the late 60s. Frank and P. G. Vinci never saw eye to eye, and he was more or less forced to resign at the age of 50 or 55. Then he opened his own shop. His own shop? He became a consultant in security for industry. He had an office on Stureplan, but he also gave lectures from time to time at CIS training sessions. That's where I met him. What did Vinci and Frank quarrel about? They were just very different. Frank was a bit of a cowboy who saw KGB agents everywhere, and Vinci was a bureaucrat of the old school. Vinci was fired shortly thereafter. A bit ironic, that, because he thought Palm was working for the KGB. Figueroa looked at the photograph of Goldberg and Frank standing side by side. I think it's time we had another talk with Justice, Edklanth told her. Millennium came out today, Figueroa said. Edklanth shot her a glance. Not a word about the Zalachenko affair, she said. So we've got a month before the next issue. Good to know. But we have to deal with Blomkvist. In the middle of all this mess he's like a hand grenade with the pin pulled.
And that marks the end of the current chapter. Thank you for listening to The Book Reader. Stay tuned for the next episode tomorrow. Please subscribe for updates.